Hello, everyone. We're just about ready to start the 1 o'clock session, which happens to be me. I'm going to take advantage of this time to remind everyone that if you've registered for this event and we have your email, we will send out information about getting a PD certificate. We will also have a website that we post with all of the presentations from the different organizations today, as well as recordings of these different sessions. So we should be able to facilitate all of that on the back end. And if you haven't had an opportunity to register and you're sharing this with a colleague, please just send us your information and we'll make sure that you're part of the event. All right. I'm going to pull up my presentation and we're going to get started. There you go. I'm going to introduce myself briefly, talk to you about a couple of different things that we have available to teachers this year, as well as to perhaps provide some thoughts and tools about how to promote civil and civic discourse during this very difficult time. So with no further ado, we're going to go to the next slide, except my arrow keys are not working. All right, so a little bit about Second Avenue Learning and about me. So I'm a former classroom teacher, a super nerdy ABD in intellectual history with a focus on French and history. And I went into corporate America, decided that I really didn't like it, went back to the classroom, and then felt that we needed to really revisit how we were thinking about teaching and learning, put the students at the center of that, and leverage digital technology to really improve learning outcomes. Doing that very much rooted in leveraging sound pedagogy, good research, and partnering with educators and students to design our solutions. We've been fortunate to receive funding from the National Science Foundation, the Library of Congress, and the Department of Education. And we're also very lucky that my team's great hard work has been acknowledged by a number of different organizations. And that is just a wonderful credit to their hard work. So I'm going to launch, if you go into the Election Edge site that is in the chat box and use your email to log in, and the password that I've given everyone, which is election20, we can do a little poll right in the application. This application is free to use during the course of this year. I will be sharing the results with you in just a few minutes. So the current poll question is: the current political climate impacting your ability to teach essential civics concepts or current events? And it's a pretty simple yes, no answer. So we're going to go over to Election Edge right now, and we're going to see how, if people are able to get in. And we have 10 students who have voted in the election right now. We can give it a little bit more time. I can tell you that in past polls, we've had a number of teachers answer this question, and they have all said absolutely yes, that it's really impacting their ability to teach and promote civil discourse in their classrooms. So how did we get here? I'm going to go back to our presentation. So how did we get here? And there's a confluence of factors. And Sonia Sotomayor has this great quote, and she observed, rightly so, that the percentage of classroom time devoted to social studies is about 7%, that it's at a historic low. And she noticed that there's a decline in the teaching of social studies and a rise in partisanship and a decrease in civic participation. And she is partially right. She's got a lot of the answers, but not all of the answers. There's a couple of other things that have happened. One is that, as you all know, the amount of dollars that are being allocated to teaching the social sciences and humanity has been declining sharply. Many sources you'll see cite 3 cents per student. Other places you'll see 5 cents. And the other thing that has really happened is a fundamental transformation in our civil discourse as a society. And I'm going to share with you some observations by the Rand Institute. So one of the things that has happened is that over the past several decades, we've actually seen a fundamental shift in the way we conduct civil discourse in this country. And there is a confluence of factors. One, there was a whole profusion of media, right? We went from having 3 major networks and a few national papers with local papers that focused on national or their local news, perhaps with pulling from the AP Wire or one of the other wire services, to a profusion of network television opportunities. The internet intervened, and we have increasingly isolated ponds where people can really reinforce their beliefs inside an echo chamber. That was actually facilitated by a series of legislative events and court cases. And the court cases that went through in the 1980s got us to a point where there was a decision that was being wrestled with around electronic media. And the courts weighed in and said that we needed to provide electronic media with the same free press liberties that the founders contemplated with print media. And so we stepped away from the truth, the fairness, and the equal time rules that had originally been applied to electronic media, primarily the network television that many of us grew up with. And so what has happened is that we've absolutely seen an emerging disagreement about facts. I remember as a little kid being told that when I wrote true fact, I was being redundant. And that's really not the case right now in the United States. And we argue about what a fact is. And we've started to blur the line between opinion and fact. And the volume of noise has really reached a crescendo where it's very difficult, unless you are completely dialed in, to be able to distinguish clearly which resources are providing valid information and which ones are really generating communications that are driven by opinion that may not be really based in accurate information. And so that has led to a polarization of the dialogue and a decline in trust. So how do we get to a place where we can actually revisit civil discourse? And like this model shows, we've had an erosion of civil discourse, we have political paralysis, and people are becoming increasingly alienated and disengaged. So there's more on this at the with the site that I've given you on the slide, and I'll put this all up afterwards. Our job as educators is to foster that civil discourse, continue to encourage students to be engaged. So how do we do that? One of the things that we did is we built Election Edge, and we did it in 2012, and we followed the last several presidential elections. And I'm going to pop out of my screen, the presentation screen, and I'm going to take you to Election Edge right now. This we did without funding from the federal government, and we did it because we felt like there was really a need to have nonpartisan tools that were very much fact-based, that educators could use in their classrooms or now remotely with their students to model good civics dialogue about both history and the current election cycles. So the election history tool is super fun. I love to show everybody that it goes all the way back to 1789, and this is what the United States looked like back then. And New York, as always, was late to the party because we couldn't agree on whether or not we were going to ratify the new materials. And you can see down here that we have all sorts of issues defining precedents, facts, new states, and exploratory questions. So every single election in US history is here for you to explore. Let's see. We are going to go, I'm going to ask you a quick question. So what election do you think was happened in the 20th century all of the states agreed, save Massachusetts and DC. And this particular president heralded the founding of the EPA and supported universal health care. Any guesses? All right, you can put your answers in the chat, but I'm going to do the big reveal. We're going to go right up here to 1972. That's the re-election of Richard Nixon. And so you can see that this president that we love to vilify was actually really overwhelmingly re-elected with support across the board. And ideas that we are currently debating right now in this country were still very much were very much a part of the dialogue in 1972, and the Democrats at that time rejected his proposals around universal health care, saying that they were going to get him out of office and push for a better deal. And we're still debating that right now in the time of a pandemic. If we go to primary pursuit, this is the primary that we had in 2016. I'll show you quickly what it looks like in 2020. So up here we have every single event that happens during the course of a primary. So Bernie Sanders exited on April 8th. We can pop into, it was we can look at North Dakota. Sanders and Biden had a very close race there. And we can look into any state that we have. If we go back to 2016, we can look at the entire map for both in the race between Clinton and Sanders. And we can also take a look at the Republican primary, where we had a very large cast of characters. All right, so now that you've taken a look at the primary map from 2016, the primary map from 2020, and I'm going to show you one more thing that we have. We have poll data right now. So here is the national poll data. I picked the wrong year, guys. We're going to go to 2020. Here is the national poll data right now for Biden and Trump. And so what we do every week is we aggregate polls that are good, reliable, valid polls from all across the country, and we push that information into this tool. It's so that educators have an opportunity to go to poll data in the classroom and have a conversation without getting into a super polarizing discourse by seeing headlines that are super controversial. So with that, the next question is, who should Sanders, not Sanders, I'm so sorry, that was, now we're going to go back here, hang on. Who should Biden's vice presidential choice be? If you go into the election tool, you can make that choice right now. And the tool is something that you could use to run classroom elections, student council elections, or use for polling with your students. So if we go into the Run Your Own Election tool, we've had 16 students. Right now, we are going to go to active elections, Biden's VP choice, and here are the results. Kamala Harris seems to be taking the lead, everyone. And so that is something that you could do with your students right now. Setting up an election is really pretty simple. There's a quick tool to create the candidates. You can see who's voted, and you have the ability to set all the materials as you go. So this election remains in progress, and we can come back to that. So speaking of super amazing women, we're going to go move on to our slide here. So we often hear this quote that well-behaved women seldom make history. And the other tool that I want to show you today is something that we've built in conjunction with the Library of Congress. And one of the important things to know is that there's a difference between polite discourse and civil discourse. And civil discourse is often seen as impolite. And if we think back on the way that women had to fight to earn their right to vote, it was often considered impolite. And Professor Chris Lundberg from UNC really has cautioned us to think about that distinction between civil discourse, which is used to promote change, hopefully for the benefit of the Commonwealth, but that it is often considered impolite, and we need to find ways to agree or disagree civilly, but not necessarily always force the notion of politeness on it. And so with that, we're going to shift over to our Voices for Suffrage application. I've put the link to this in your in the chat. And what this is a history of women's suffrage. And if we click on this, you can see that we have a scrapbook here, and each of these things is clickable and has all sorts of great citations with it. We have the opportunity to explore the movement, going through guided tours, and the timeline. First, I'm going to take you to the timeline, actually. So many people forget how long it actually took women to earn the right to vote. So if we go back to 1848, which is sort of the informal beginning of the suffrage movement, in 1848, this is what the United States looked like. And it took over 70 years for women to get the right to vote, right? And if you notice, women start getting suffrage in the West well before they start getting it in the East. And then we get to 1910, we start to see more states coming online, and then we get to 1916, 1917, and then we get to 1920 when the 19th Amendment was finally passed. So this is, every state has different resources available within it. We can take a peek and see the different people who were part of the movement. One of the other things I want to show you here is guided tours. And we have a couple of different tours that we can show you today. And we've tried to focus on some of the essential questions. This one is on opposition. What opposition did the suffragists face? We sort of take it as a fait accompli that women were going to get the right to vote. We forget very often that it took them over 70 years. And we have some really traditional activities that you can use. This one is just a matching activity. You can see some primary sources from the Library of Congress. There's a little blurb about this with citations, and you have you know, a whole different set, lots of different sets of activities that you can do here. The one activity that I wanted to take a moment to share with you is an activity that we've borrowed from our friends in the United Kingdom. And it asks students to go on a journey where they draw inferences. And this is really designed to help them build critical thinking skills. So what does the source tell me? What can I infer from the source? And then it asks a very concrete question. What does the source not tell me? And what else would I would like to find out? So it's really helping scaffold the interpretation of the source, as well as setting them up to ask good historical questions. Also included in this guided tour is, of course, the link to the Library of Congress primary source analysis tool, which I'm sure you all know, which encourages students to observe, reflect, and question. And so this is also available in the tool. That is available absolutely for free. So we're going to pop back to the presentation. And we're going to ask you to vote one more time. The new poll question is, the demand for equal rights for women has a long history stretching from 1848 to the present. What action do you think should be taken with regard to the ERA? If, for those of you who are old enough to remember, the ERA was ratified or was authorized by the Senate in 1972 and sent out to the states for ratification. As of this last year, we were still 3 states short. And there's been quite a controversy about whether or not 3 states should ratify it and we should accept that amendment. So this is something else that you could use our tool for, and we can go into that election right now and see how people are doing with that. So what do we think? The ERA. We have 10 votes for pursue the three-state strategy and 8 votes for submit it again. We have about 275 participants in this session, so don't be shy about voting. You can come in and cast your ballots at any time, and we'll share them out after this session. So if we go a little bit further, we get to COVID-19, and this is a fabulous opportunity for you guys to exercise and a connection between teaching about a current event and building historical thinking and data skills. So we're going to take a look at this. Right now, in 1918, we had the epidemic, which seems to have so many echoes of our current situation. And this is the interior of a hospital at Camp Jackson in South Carolina. And we were grateful to the National Museum of Health and Medicine for sharing this image with us. If I go back in time just a little bit, this is the Johns Hopkins site from the day that I decided to close our office here in Rochester, New York. This was March 12th. I'd been watching the Johns Hopkins data since the beginning of, end of January, beginning of February, and it seemed to me that things were getting very bad, and we decided to close ahead of most of the rest of New York State. And you know, there was data all over this country. And as you think about what data you can share with your students, giving them opportunities to look at data like this versus data that might be published in more traditional publications is a great opportunity to give them insight into how to analyze whether or not data is accurate and trustworthy. And even interrogating a source like this, where you have fabulous researchers who are aggregating data from all over the world, you can say, do we think we have sufficient data from any of the countries that are currently reporting? Are the reporting systems up to date? Are we seeing fair and accurate information from all of the countries? And we can use this as a conversation starter. And then we get to here we are right now in the United States. This was from just a few days ago. I think we're now up over 4 million cases, and we are certainly now over 80,000 deaths in the United States, which is certainly tragic. And if we look down here in the lower right corner, we see that it looks like we're kind of hitting a plateau in the United States, and that we're hearing a lot of discourse in this country about it being time to reopen. And so as we think about how we share this information with students, maybe it's time to look at that data and take one step and really interrogate the information that's in there. And that's why we've made this commitment in our Election Edge platform to really give them an opportunity to look at data historically, as well as to be able to model and play with some other components of US elections. So here is the current coronavirus curve in the United States. And if we look up here, it certainly looks like it's flattening. However, if we look here and we take out New York City, the curve starts to separate because New York City was really the epicenter. And maybe we aren't quite understanding that data because we haven't pulled it apart to look at that next level. And then when we go down even further and we pull out New Orleans and Detroit, which were also tragically hot spots, we do see that the data is actually perhaps not recommending a reopening of communities around the country, or that we might need to think about it very carefully. So the next poll question for you guys to answer inside of Election Edge is, as the United States continues to manage the public health response to COVID, which level of government do you think should control the process of reopening? And this is really a great opportunity for you to speak with students about federalism, the powers of government, the shared powers between the states and the federal government, powers reserved to the states, and then how states individually apportion powers down into counties and cities. So how are we doing in that poll? Are people able to actually go in and vote? I'm hoping so. We can go back into active elections. We can look at the federalism poll. All right, let's see the results. Regional state coalition seems to be the clear winner. We do have some people who are really fighting for individual states. Cities and counties seem to be lagging behind. So let's, we can move on from there. We can come back and look at how we're doing with these elections in a few minutes. I want to see quickly if anybody else has voted in the Biden poll. Let's take a quick. Kamala Harris is still in the lead. So we'll go on from there. All right, back to our presentation. So one of the things that has really been difficult as I've talked to educators around the country is having a framework for having a civil discourse. And one of the easy examples that we've looked at for modeling that kind of discourse is the very common conversation these days around peanuts in schools. When we went to school, everybody had PB&J in their pocket or their lunchbox with their lunch, and it wasn't really an issue. With the emergence of food allergies over the last 15 years, it has become a life-threatening issue in schools across America. And I think now most schools are at a point where they are peanut-free. However, as it began, there was classrooms were supposed to be peanut-free, and there were peanut-free tables in lunchrooms, and students had to be isolated. So you could use this example to leverage the R method, which is, you know, there's a simple statement. We could say our school should be peanut-free. The reasoning is why? Because several students in our school have a food allergy and it could cause them to become ill or die. And then what is the data or evidence? And so if you start out very in a small way and you practice this with things that are close to students, you can actually then grow those skills and expand it to more meaty issues because they will have these issues in their toolkit. And again, the resources for this are Teaching Tolerance, Civil Discourse in the Classroom. And then you can, here's another tool in your toolkit. There's sort of this 4-step refutation model. So you're going to hear very often, they say. And that can be a really, you know, sort of a red hot button in a classroom. But then you can offer a refutation and offer data to support it and then conclude. And then you can invite students to actually do that for a counterposition. So if they're very emphatic about something, you can invite them to create that same kind of argument in a way that supports the opposite position. And I know as civics educators and social studies educators, you're all really schooled at doing this and you've done it with deep practice. But at this moment in time, when we're seeing such difficult controversy in having this kind of civic discourse, I thought it was worth revisiting. One more slide here, and that is on modeling discourse. So as someone who's, you know, a philosophy and history nut, I'm often taken back to some of our classic texts like Plato and Aristotle. And I think about the fact that we actually used to use the word discourse and it had a very specific meaning. And one of the things that is become problematic again is this binary, this either or trap or yes, no trap. And so one of the things that you can do is invite people to really question their position and ask them, like maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think that is important? Or can you rate the reliability of your data? And get them to sort of inquire about their position. And then invite them to say, huh, that's a really interesting and valid perspective. What would it take for you to change your mind? What kind of evidence might make you think more deeply, more critically, or differently about the issue that we're discussing here today? And then find sources of information that may or may not support that and invite that. You can do that in small groups, you can do that in pairs, you could do it on a discussion board right now in our remote learning landscape. And then offer multiple paths, right? You don't want to be seen as somebody who's pushing one didactic perspective, but that you might want to spend more time looking at ways to promote dialogue in a civil way. So with that, I thought maybe we could bounce back to Election Edge for a minute and take a look at a couple of the other resources and then shift to Q&A. I want to take you into Prediction Central for right now, because this is something that you could be doing with your classes right now. And we can load the 20, this is all based on current poll data. So we can see where the states are that are battleground states. And interestingly, this year, Texas is looking like it might not be a foregone conclusion to be Republican, which is not something that we would normally expect. So if we go over here, we can say that I think perhaps Washington and Oregon are going to go to Biden. And I think that, oh, let's see, West Virginia might be a toss-up this time around. And then we're pretty certain that Maryland and Illinois are going to go for Biden. And then let's see, the Dakotas and Nebraska and Montana and Idaho have been pretty solidly red over the last few years. Students can take the poll data information that they have on this other tab, and you can ask them to submit their prediction map of where they think this election is going to go. And we're actually going to run a huge contest when we get to November, and we're going to look at all of the submitted responses and let you know which students are actually have a future career as being a pundit on CNN or the network of your choice with solid forecasting. But this is a fabulous way of connecting data, right? So we can take a look at this poll data right now in Texas, right? So it started off with a pretty big spread, and it's starting to narrow, right? Or we can look at, you know, a state like Florida, which has been a battleground state for the past several elections, going back to 2000, and see how that data is faring, right? And a few years ago, when we did this in the last general election, we had a young girl who had an IEP in 8th grade, and she was really struggling in math. She was in 8th grade, but her math skills were probably down around a 3rd grade level. She was actually able to use this tool in front of her class to confidently project which states were likely to go for which candidates. And it was a way of integrating quantitative thinking and data analysis with social sciences. And it was just a great way for the teachers in both the math department and the social studies department to get together and really help students think through this. So the other thing that we can do here is we can actually go back and change history. So if there's an election that you would really like to change, you can do that. So if we went to, let's see, we're going to go, why don't we go to 2000, right? So this is the election where we had the hanging chads, right? And Florida was the state that was the source of all that controversy. If we wanted to change history, you actually have a really easy way to say, all right, if Florida had gone that way, Al Gore would have been the winner. We can, of course, do that with more recent elections. And we can also use that. We can use those same sort of critical reasoning skills to go back to Prediction Central. So students have the opportunity to look at historical elections and see things like, you know, the Democratic Party has really changed over the years. Maybe my understanding of what that party is needs to evolve. And the Republican Party's definition has really changed over the years. How has that evolved? Like if we get to 1980 with the first election of Ronald Reagan, we see that all of a sudden the South has gone Republican for the first time in history, essentially. And then we see this great landslide that he had in 1984, where he took everything except for the District of Columbia and Minnesota. And we see, you know, if we go back to 1972 quickly, you know, that looks fairly similar. So we had this solid landslide where going in, these were not foregone conclusions, right? So now if we go to 2016, you see, here's the map. If we wanted to change history in 2016, how could Hillary have won? He got 304 electoral votes. Hillary only got 227. So we know that she did not do as expected in Michigan and Wisconsin. And perhaps if she had been able to take Ohio, she would have won. So the Rust Belt becomes the space where she actually underperformed. And if we go back to our poll data from 2016, right, we can see going into election night, this data was as of the last day before the election, things were perhaps not as solid as she thought. And that even though she had a large groundswell of Democratic support in the South, because of our electoral college system, she was not going to earn votes from those states. And, you know, if you need a little refresher on how the electoral college works or the primaries work, we have some quick videos here for you on those as well. So we also have on our website, I put this in the chat, Second Avenue Learning, come play with us. We have a great opportunity for you to play test games that we have going forward. And you can log on here and we will provide you with information about all of our upcoming games. Let's take a quick look at the elections to see if we've had any more votes come in. We'll go here and let's see, we'll go to the federalism one and look at the results. We still have the states as the big ones. And we'll go to Joe Biden. And we've had more votes come in and Kamala Harris is still in the lead. So that's the focus of our core presentation here today. Happy to take some question and answers right now. And we'll go from there. You do have an opportunity. We've got a free account. After this conference, you will have, you'll get a new password and we can roster your entire classroom and you can use it free for the rest of the year. And there is no rostering required for Voices for Suffrage. So a couple of different tools for you guys to use as we finish out this year. And we have a wonderful array of new things coming in this next year. This presentation, as well as all the sources that we included for further exploration, will be available to you after this webinar.
Corey, a quick question that I'm fielding from some folks out there. They want to know how often we're updating the app so that data is accurate and timely.
Okay, great question. So we update our poll data once a week. And that is because we aggregate data from all over the country and we look at state level data as well as national data. And we actually have a tool inside of Election Edge that allows us to sort of show you the delta between different kinds of polls and polls that we deem to be more or less reliable. And that's a great opportunity for you to introduce that concept with your students as well. When it comes to the primary data, this year has been a little bit different. So typically we would have stayed up all night to look at the primary results and updated before school starts the next morning. However, because of the pandemic, the results are more slow to come in. So if we go to the primary screen, hang on just a second, primary pursuit, and we look at the map, we can take a look at a state. We can look at like Wisconsin, and we now have this. We now have results for that, but it was actually very slow to come in. And so, for example, New York, our primary has been shifted. It was supposed to happen in April. It's now happening in June. So all of this information is updated as it happens and as we have reliable data. And you can see all sorts of things like here, Michael Bloomberg left, and we have other things if we come back in time. You can see that, you know, this is when Patrick Duvall entered or Michael Bloomberg entered. I'm seeing to be and, you know, a variety of the Dem candidates. And if we go to the Republican side, we can click on a state like Hawaii, and all of the delegates were given to Trump, and they canceled their primary and caucus because they did not want to hold it. They wanted to just at the party level, they got to make that decision and award those delegates to the candidate of their choice. So, any other questions?
We have a few folks that are wondering how they can create their own election. Everyone today that has access to the platform was given access as a student so they could participate in Tori's class. We're happy to set you up with your own teacher account, and I can have Tori walk you through what that would look like.
Absolutely. So if you want to create a new election, you just type your election name in here, so we can put in demo election. And then we can start it tomorrow. We'll start it for Thursday. And we're going to keep voting open for a couple of days because students really don't have a lot of, you know, their schedules are a little bit upside down these days. So we might want to give them an opportunity. And here, we're not going to make students we're not going to have student candidates this time around, but you could use this very easily to do a government, you know, a student government election going forward, right? And then you can, we'll save this new election, and then here you have your demo election, and we can edit it, and we can add the candidates, and we're going to just say, we're going to put in Biden. And we're going to say that he's a Democrat, and we're going to add that candidate, and then we're going to put in Trump. And whoops, I can't type and talk at the same time. Republican, add candidate. And then over here, we can apply all changes. And then you can actually see here, and then because you guys are all part of my class right now, I would be able to see who voted. So if we go over here to one of our other active elections, we can go to the ERA one right now, and you as a teacher administrator would be able to see who in your class has voted. And we have, you know, we had, I think, almost 1,000 people register for this today. Not everybody has taken advantage of the opportunity to vote in this, but then you would have all of your students right here. And one of the things that Brian from my team has shared is that all of the accounts that you have right now, you're going to be automatically transitioned into a teacher account, and you'll have access to this tool as of, I think, tomorrow morning or maybe the end of the webinar today. You will have to reset your password, and then you'll have the ability to have us roster your students or to roster your own students. We have a pretty seamless process for doing that, so that if you wanted to use this to engage students in some civil discourse as we get through the end of this academic year, you certainly can. And we would love to have you use this platform going into September, whether we are in class in the buildings or we're still doing this distance or some version in between. Any other questions?
Tori, I am getting some questions on what other resources that we're offering with the product, such as teacher guides, lesson plans, activities, and the like.
We have lesson plans for middle school through high school, including AP US History. We are always interested in producing more lesson plans and looking for partners with them. We can, once you have access as a teacher, you will have access to all the lesson plans that we are currently publishing, and we will be adding new activities that we push out as we enter the election season next fall. Any other questions today? All right. Well, I thank you all very much. I'm going to switch back into my my conference role. At 2 o'clock, we're going to be hearing from Emma Humphreys, who is one of my favorite educators of all times. She is the Chief Education Officer at iCivics, and her talk is entitled Shelter and Play, Strengthening Student Motivation to Soften the Summer Slide. So we'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock. Take care.